Hey loves, you are welcome to my channel. My name is Olivia. On today's video, I'm going to share with you guys how to cut and sew a cold shoulder cowl sleeve with cuff. But one thing about this sleeve is that it's like a cold shoulder sleeve like this, but also in a form of cowl sleeve which has a cuff. So if this is something you are interested in, then keep on watching. So before we start with the sleeve, let me give you a gist on how I made the upper part of this dress. I made a tutorial on how to draft a basic bodice pattern. So this is mine and I'm going to modify it into the upper part of the dress. So first of all, I'm just pinning this pattern onto the fabric. This is into 4 because I want to use the same fabric to line the dress. So here I'm adding side seam allowance. This is the back. I also added 1/2 inch to the shoulder part as a joining allowance, and also about 1.25 inches for zipper allowance. I also added 1/2 inch to the bottom part of the pattern as a joining allowance, and also the armhole. So for the front, I did the same thing like I did to the back, but I added a button overlap of 1.5. This is because I'll be lining the dress. I'll be lining the front part, so I added just 1.5. So if you wouldn't line it, add 2.5 inches from the center of the front to serve as button overlap. I also transfer the dart just like this. So because I don't want the nipple point to be too pointed, I'll come down by 1 inch from the nipple point like this, and then I'll mark that 1 inch. So that will be our new dart line. So from that point, I'll connect it to the other side like this. So I'll start sewing from there. So afterwards, I'll iron the dart towards the side seam like this. So this is how it looks. I iron an interfacing at the bottom overlap. I also join the shoulders together and press them open. Now for the cold part of the sleeve, or the off part of the sleeve, we need to determine it. So from the shoulder line, you mark down how deep you want or how off you want. So came down by 2.5, and then from that 2.5 I'll go in by just 1/2 inch because that is the joining allowance I used, and then I'll notch that 1/2 inch just like this, but not to the 1/2 inch, close to the 1/2 inch, just like this. And I'll repeat the same thing on the lining. So here we have our notches like that. Do you see? Okay, so I'll pick the lining and place it right sides facing the main piece, just like this, and I'll pin it into place, making sure the shoulders match each other. So when I take it to my machine, from one notch to the other, I'll sew it just like that with the 1/2 inch allowance. So I'll just pin it. Now pin the other side as well. So I'll stitch from one end to the other. So now after stitching, you should notch to the 1/2 inch that you've sewn. You know, I said do not notch to that 1/2 inch point. So now you have to notch so that when you flip it, you will not have any small line. So I also went ahead to join all other side with just 1/4 of an inch to make the dress neat. So I'll turn it inside out, excluding the neckline because that is where the collar will be fixed. So I'll go ahead and turn it inside out and give it a good press. So now you know there is a zipper allowance at the back. So I'm going to pin it down just like this. So from the starting point of the neckline, I'll come down by 2.5, and then I'll stitch from that point to the 2.5, and then after the 2.5, that is where the zipper will be fixed. So 1/2 inch will be joined to the collar, so by the time you are done, you have 2 inches left. So let's move to the main reason why you clicked on this video. So I'll mark around my armhole like this, and I have 8.5. So draft a normal sleeve, and you have to also take note of the amount you took off. So mine is 2.5. So let's draft. I'll draw a straight line like this as a starting point. The total length of my long sleeve is 23, and then I want my cuff to be 4 inches, so I'll deduct that from the 23. I have 19. I'll add 1 inch for sewing allowance, so I have 20 inches. So from the starting point, I'll mark down my crown. So to calculate crown, you divide your bust by 12 inches and you add 0.5. So mostly it's either, it ranges from 3.5 and 4 inches. So this depends on your bust measurement. So I'll take note of that like this. So my total armhole is 8.5. I'll slant my tape measure like this because that is how I like to do it, and I'll put it into a straight line like this, and I'll find the midpoint, and then I'll draw my armhole as shown. I'll take the same measurement I have on my crown, and then I'll place it on the edge of the sleeve like this because it's going to be puff. So now we came down by 2.5 on the armhole. So on the sleeve I'll come down by 2.5. If you don't want to go through this, you can also draft a normal off-shoulder sleeve. Okay, so I'll divide the rest into 3 equal parts. This definitely depends on how your sleeve is. So I'll take off that 2.5, and then I'll name this 1, 2, 3. I'll go ahead and take that 2.5 off like this, and then I'll slash the other ones just like this. So I folded my satin into 2, and then from the center of the satin I'll mark 3.5. This also depends on you. You can use 3, you can use 4. So the more you use, the more big the sleeve becomes. So if you don't want much, then you can use like 2 inches or 2.5. So I'll put it into a straight line like this, and then I'll place the pattern on it just like this at the edge of the line. And now I want my pleat to be 3 inches. So all the patterns will have 3 inches difference. So I'll mark 3 inches from there like this, and that is where I'll place the third one, number 3, on the line like this. I also do same to the other ones, 3 inches apart. So by the time I fold or I pleat, that 3 inches is going to be 1.5. So after the last one, so I'll mark the end of the 3 inches with my chalk like this, and this will help me to be able to fold or pleat the sleeve. So after the last slash, I'll go up by 2 inches, and this is going to serve as a facing, because I want the sleeve to have a facing. So the facing will be like this inside the sleeve at the end of the day. So I'll pin it down and fold it like this, and then I'll cut it out just like this. So I'll notch all the markings I've done. This will definitely help you whilst pleating so that you don't get confused. So one notch to the other, just like that. Okay. I'll open up my sleeve and start pleating upwards from the starting line, from one notch to the other. You would see that I have notched. So from one notch to the other, upwards. So the leftover is now the facing. So I'll flip it to the wrong side like this. and that is how it's going to be. So when I take it to the machine, I'll stitch the pleats in place. So before that, I'll sew 1/4 of an inch of the facing. You know the facing is 2 inches before I flip it and then I stitch, if that makes sense. So this is how I'm going to tack the pleats down. So let's move to the cuff. So this cuff depends on how you want it, okay? Mine is 4 inches. Remember, I deducted 4 inches. So plus half an inch will be 4.5, and double of that will be 9 inches because I want the edge of the cuff to be on the fold. So I'll put it on fold like this. So this is into 4, all right? So in a fold now will be 4.5. So I'll mark 4.5, or I'll measure 4.5 like this. And then you should take note of the width of your cuff as well, okay? So the cuff will be high like that, so you measure and feel comfortable and make sure it passes through your hand like this. So I'll mark half of that and then I'll input it, and afterwards I'll add half an inch for sewing allowance. So this 4.5 inches includes joining allowance, that's to join to the sleeve itself. So I'll open it up and then I'll stitch just like I'm pinning. I'll stitch that 1/2 inch allowance like this. So this is how it looks now. I realized that my cuff is too long for me, so I reduced it by 1/2 an inch. So right now I have 4 inches. That means at the end of the day I have 3.5 plus the same 1/2 an inch for joining allowance. So I'll press it open like this, and then I'll fold it into 2 just like this and turn it inside out. That way the edge of the cuff will be on fold. So this is what I mean. So side seam to side seam. So this is the sleeve. I've gone ahead to stitch down the pleats in place. I've also hemmed 1/4 of an inch of the facing and folded it like this, so the facing is inside. And now after that I'll tack it down just in place. Now I've also run a basting stitch or a gathering stitch, so I'll go ahead and gather the lower part of the sleeve so it fits around the cuff. Okay, so you should measure around the cuff like this to get a full measurement, and then you measure the same thing on the edge of the sleeve, including joining allowance or sewing allowance. So I'll tie the ends of the gathered part so it does not move. Okay, so I'll fold it into 2 equal parts like this. And then I'll stitch the allowance. You know, on the armhole, there is an allowance on your armhole, I mean on the dress. So the allowance you took, you stitch that same allowance like that. Alright, so you can iron hemming gum to the facing so it stays in place. Okay, alright, so I'll turn it inside out like this, and then I'll pick my cuff side seam to side seam. I'll place it inside the sleeve like this, and then afterwards I'll just pin them together. Make sure the side seams are the same, so I'll pin them together like this, and then afterwards I'll stitch around it. So voila, this is how it looks. So now I'll go ahead and attach it to the dress. So where you stop after that 2.5 inch, that is where you start joining the sleeve. So I'll place it inside like this, so the sleeve will start from that point, just like this. Then I'll pin them in place, side seam of the dress to the side seam of the sleeve, and then afterwards I'll just stitch round. So this is how it looks after stitching. I've also added zipper to the upper bodice of the dress, and this is how the cowl sleeve came out. So I hope you've really learned something and you did enjoy this video. If you did, please kindly like it, subscribe if you haven't. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in my next one.